And right now we are on the final session, which is the International Spotlight session. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about the Southeast Asia data center overview, prospering in the pandemic. Well, we've got with us Alex Perkins, the Data Center Solutions Lead, APAC GLL. Well, Alex has over 20 years of experience in the real estate industry in the Asia Pacific, covering critical environment facilities, including data centers, trading floors, and enterprise sites, working with data center operators, end users, and developers. Well, Alex, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us today and being a part of the World Cloud Show virtually today in the Manila edition. So thank you once again for joining us on behalf of Trescon. Over to you, Alex.
Ivana, thank you very much. Appreciate the invitation to speak today. So as you mentioned, we're going to be looking at the Southeast Asia focus and a bit of a market overview on the data centers and where that's going for Southeast Asia. So I'm just going to share a presentation for a moment, and hopefully you can see that now.
Yes, we can, Alex.
Okay, that's great. So what I'm going to do is, sorry, excuse me for just a moment. Right, so let's move on to that presentation, and we're going to go through some of the drivers behind the what has been happening in the data center market, and some of these sort of points are global, some of them are relating to Asia Pacific, and we'll go over some specifics or Southeast Asia metrics as well. But as most businesses have fared very badly over the pandemic, there's been a group, perhaps no great surprise, that have benefited quite a lot through this. So we've got some statistics here about some of the bigger companies or the bigger growth. I actually drew the line at those who've grown only over $30 billion in a quarter since the beginning of the year. So, you know, perhaps some unsurprising names up there: Amazon, Microsoft, Tencent, Google, Ali Cloud. All of these groups grew principally on cloud services. Also things like, you know, we're here on WebEx today at the moment, but Zoom, we've got Zoom up there. You know, this time last year, there were around about 20-30 million participants a day. Currently, it's running at over 300 million a day. Microsoft as well, the Microsoft Teams up to over 115, 120 million on a daily basis, up from about 20 million a year ago. So these are big changes in terms of sort of the usage of the online platforms, the video meetings, the video streaming type groups, and that has put a big impact on the data center demand and big growth. Some of the other groups there, like Amazon, Pinduoduo, Meituan Dianping, these groups doing e-commerce, offering e-commerce platforms. Again, as the bricks and mortar retail has fallen to one side over the last sort of 6 or 9 months, then the online platforms have grown sort of significantly. There were perhaps sort of a few dents in that story. So you look at Google. Basically, in Q1, their advertising revenue collapsed almost completely. I mean, they're still recording a very strong increment in terms of sort of their market value. However, there are some ups and downs in this. So, you know, when the advertising revenue is easy to pull, companies are trying to save costs, so advertising revenue goes quite quickly. But then we look at some of the other drivers through this. There's things like gaming. You can see NVIDIA, the hours spent gaming, they reckon went up about 50% during the lockdown. Groups like SCA, the game Free Fire was looking at 80 million active users a day during that period. So these are big online drivers behind these groups and the whole data center industry in general. So when we look to the six sort of key buckets of where's the market going and what is behind the rise and where is it now, this is how we're sort of categorizing the key drivers. And interestingly enough, when we look at these, there are the big ones like sort of cloud computing, still forecast to grow at over sort of 20% over the next sort of five years. AI and machine learning is on a very fast growth curve at the moment. It's estimated at growing at almost sort of 50% a year. The number that's been put on this has been somewhere just shy of 400 billion for hardware and software by 2025. However, just to cap all of that, there's been a recent announcement that the Chinese groups are looking at investing over $1 trillion over the next sort of 3 or 4 years. So already that sort of number there is starting to look a bit small. And obviously it's quite a nascent sector. People are sort of talking about it all of the time. But it's going to grow fast, and it's really going to affect everything. Everything from sort of spreadsheets and presentations to robots, to self-driving cars, and pretty much everything in between. Social media. I mean, this was looking at about a sort of 10% year-on-year growth rate, which sort of doesn't seem like very much, sort of compared with some of the other categories we've been looking at. But then we have to consider the scale of that and the numbers of people who are using sort of social media on a day-to-day basis. And Asia Pacific has added about 200 million users in the last sort of 12 months. So despite the fact that pretty much everyone's using social media in one shape or form, there's still some growth in that. But the big increase there through the pandemic is that over 40% increase in social media use on a daily basis to almost sort of 2.5 hours per user per day, which is pretty high. E-commerce, we sort of touched on that a bit. It's now over 18% of global retail coming out of the pandemic. Sort of recent numbers. As a percentage of spend, some interesting figures here. We'll get onto some more detail in a second. But China has the highest percentage of spend. At over a third of all spend in China is now basically on an e-commerce platform. So these are sort of big drivers, and looking at some of the other things as well. The last sort of two buckets that we've got there: mobile gaming, a relatively sort of niche type activity for sort of serious gamers. However, if you consider that pretty much most of Asia Pacific consumes the internet on a mobile device, 84% of users play a game, and most of those on a mobile device. In fact, the number one mobile app download category has been games, perhaps unsurprisingly, through the pandemic, with an increase in almost a third. And then going back to that chart of who's prospered sort of through this, Honor of Kings from Tencent is the number one game download. And I think one of the key things through this as a category is that there's been traditionally there hasn't been sort of much spend on games, but now we're seeing people spending a lot and adding to their enjoyment of a product and spending more on a per user basis on games. And then finally, sort of the big one in terms of sort of what is driving the internet traffic. So 70% or more of internet traffic is video streaming. Whether it's a conference like this, or whether you're watching YouTube or Netflix at home, or doing TikTok videos or whatever might be. So over 50% increase in streaming during the pandemic, and perhaps again, no surprise there, TikTok is the #1 downloaded app from that sort of perspective. So let's have a look at some of the numbers on a Southeast Asia basis. The first one here, daily mobile internet usage. So this the Philippines is actually sort of the winner globally. A little bit over 5 hours a day people are spending on mobile internet, versus an average of about 3 hours 20. But you can see there, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, also sort of those numbers are much higher than an average, and that's really sort of showing you how people are using the mobile platforms and engaging with the internet and the cloud-based products. And again, in terms of my point to it being very much a mobile-driven usage of it, you can see each of those countries there an average of 135% connections per count of population. So pretty dense usage and concentration there. Social media time, as we mentioned, again that has increased. That average has gone up on a global basis, but leading the pack there, sort of just under 4 hours a day. Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand as some of the leaders in terms of people spending time on it. But if you think that everybody's just playing, that's not quite true. Most of these people and most of these groups are actually using social media for work. They've got chat groups. They're communicating with their colleagues. They're engaging with customers. E-commerce was another big one that we touched on there, and actually interesting that the highest adoption of mobile e-commerce platforms is actually in Indonesia, and this is underpinned by very simple, easy to use, and importantly cheap platforms like Gojek and Grab. Started off just as ride-hailing and have expanded their range of services that they offer. But the key thing there is they're all underpinned by a quick, simple sort of payment platform. And you can also sort of see by comparison in terms of where the dollars are spent. So South Korea is actually the highest average spend per user. This was 2019, so the numbers have gone up. That's the full year figures. But also as the adoption rates are increasing, the Philippines is the lowest one there at $20 a year per user. These numbers are only going to go up quite rapidly as these types of platforms become more common. So then let's have a look at these markets. What are the established markets and the developing ones? I think the established ones are sort of fairly well known across sort of Asia Pacific. Those are the key hubs for domestic and international operators. A lot of them serve the developing markets. There hasn't been a need perhaps to sort of expand into Southeast Asia if you can do everything from Singapore or Australia or perhaps Hong Kong. But that landscape is changing now, and as we can see, the relative size of whether Manila, Bangkok, Jakarta, even sort of Taipei, Mumbai, they're sort of much smaller than their regional competitors, but that's really just pointing to sort of a higher growth rate there. But the key factors here are talking about an imbalance of demand and supply. A lot of the co-location groups looking to enter into these markets and to provide a platform for services. But there are also some opportunities, and the two key ones here is one is to sort of build out to the latest standards, and those standards are sort of very much changing. There's an opportunity to build to higher environmental standards. The older facilities are very inefficient and there's a chance now to, if we're entering some of these new markets, to do it better, to do it more efficiently, to look at the sustainability around, the sourcing of particularly of power. So then finally, just sort of, to go into, some key trends to finish off. Yes, there is sort of expansion across all of Asia Pacific. Some of those the more traditional sort of developed markets have hit some problems. Sort of Singapore is on a bit of a go slow. The government have basically mandated a slowdown in data center development by not conferring any more power to new data center sites, which has led to a lot of sort of questions from the industry, and has led to people starting to think about, okay, well, if I'm not in Singapore, where do I go? So, the obvious correlation there being if Singapore has previously served, Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, then should those platforms move locally to those locations? The cloud platforms and the expansions of that and the prevalence of that in pretty much everything that people do is driving a lot of this, making things easier and making things simpler. As we just heard on the panel, it's the speed, it's the efficiency, it's the ease of access to these things that is driving that, and it's going to become ubiquitous across those landscapes and across all geographies, really. Also, this was touched upon, the focus on the legislation and compliance, the potential for data localization laws, meaning that the data has to be held on shore rather than in a third location. I suppose the sort of a classic example of this would be Facebook. If you put a post on Facebook in Asia, those posts actually are all kept and stored in a data center in the US. There's one coming up in Singapore, but in the meantime, whilst they all have space in co-location sites, the big storage is in the core of that platform is done in the US. So potentially that breaks up and sort of drives further data center demand in country rather than on a centralized basis. We're seeing a lot of increasing rack density. Again, this is a bit of a problem in the more established markets where 2015, even sort of 10 years ago, people were looking at 2, 3, 4, 5 kilowatts a rack. The market's moved on. It's sort of 6 to 8, even higher these days, depending on the application. But the efficiency is so important, and it's important from two key factors, very fundamentally and very basically. The more inefficient it is, the more expensive it is to run. Nobody likes that, and nobody likes that dislikes that more than the hyperscale players when they're talking about tens of megawatts, not a few hundred kilowatts, as an enterprise group might be looking at. Crudely across most of Asia Pacific, a megawatt for a year is over $1 million US. That's a simple way to think about it. But the other part of that is the efficiency of the actual site. If you look at the average PUE in Asia Pacific is over 2. That means for every megawatt of IT power that you're deploying, you're wasting a megawatt in terms of cooling and other losses within the system, electrical losses within the system, which is very inefficient. So, what we're seeing there is that the hyperscale groups in particular are pushing down those PUE figures as far as they can go. But the other part of that is important, is the environmental, the sustainability piece of it. So there again, what we're seeing now is Microsoft earlier this year and Google just a few weeks ago coming out and saying that by 2030 these groups are aiming to be carbon neutral, including their data centers, which is going to be a big challenge. But everybody is asking the question, where can I get renewable power? Where can I get environmentally friendly build for the data centers? So, crucial aspects coming up. A lot of changes within the industry and definitely a lot of growth in the Asia Pacific region. So, with that, that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alex, for joining us and being a part of the World Cloud Show. Well, it was really good to have you. And at the end, towards the end, it always says that you save the best. So thank you once again, Alex, for joining us today.
No problem. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.